The art from our community. It's from all the Dios members. So today we are exploring the power of imagination when it is combined with the power of love. We know that love is the great harmonizer, the great attractor in the universe. And when we combine the power of imagination with the power of love, the truth is there is no stopping us. Last week, we talked about the importance of taking time to meditate and be still in order to pause the mind and in order to pause the imagination, because the mind and the imagination can be like a wild monkey, where it just sort of wanders off and creates all kind of unwanted scenario. It's like the monkey grabbing one branch and then another branch and another branch, and so it's grabbing all the different thoughts and running wild. Ellen DeGeneres has a great example of the imagination running wild. And it's a little thing from her when she was doing stand-up, and it was called The Manager. And she said, in this, she said, "My imagination stops me." When you're a kid, your imagination is fun, and nobody ever tries to stop you. She says, but when you get older, you use your imagination to keep you from doing things. At least that's what I do. Like, I'll want to do something, and I think, well, what if? Let's say, for instance, that I'm out of cheese. And then I think, well, what if I go to the store and they're out of cheese? And I'll be like, well, how can you be out of cheese? And they'd say, well, how can we be out of cheese? Well, you're out of cheese and people are out of cheese. And she'd say, well, yeah, but you're a store, and that you should have cheese stocked up in the back for people like me who are coming in looking for cheese. And then that's when they send for the manager, who thinks he's cool for being a manager because his picture is framed in front of the store because he's the manager. And he'd be like, oh, what's the problem, ma'am? Which is condescending. It's like saying little lady. And I'd be like, the little lady's problem. And he'd say, well, who's the little lady? Shut up and listen to me. You're out of cheese and I want some. And he says, well, how about some cottage cheese? You know, like he's going to negotiate the situation, like he's a diplomat because he's the manager. I don't want cottage cheese. I want sharp cheddar cheese is what I came in for. Sharp cheddar cheese and cottage cheese are not the same thing, because just because they have cheese in the title doesn't make it cheese at all. She says, like going to a musical instrument store, and I'd say I'd like to buy a trumpet, and they say, I'm sorry, we're all out of trumpets, but would you like a shoehorn? See? It's not the same thing. And then he starts getting all nervous because the crowd is forming and starts feeling humiliated because they're all sitting around mumbling, what's the problem? I don't know, she wants some cheese. The story actually goes on from there. But you get the idea, don't you? That sometimes that's what our imagination does. That as we grow up and we're adults, we create the what-if scenarios, and then the next thing we know, I don't really want any cheese. That's where she ends up. I don't want any cheese. We've invited our children to the service today, and they have great imaginations. Kids' boundaries are still really fuzzy, like they haven't quite locked into this dimension yet. They haven't quite locked into this world, so their boundaries are kind of loose. And they love life, so no matter what they're doing, they engage their imaginations. When my children were small, I mean, Caroline would get up in the morning and she'd put on her boots, and then she'd get a backpack and fill it with stuff and put on her hat, and then she'd walk around the house and pretend she was on some fantastic journey. And this would last for hours. The two of them would just create one scenario after another. And so, in keeping with this idea of imagination, I'd like to share with you a book that Marilou loaned me called Once Upon a Saturday by Leslie Lamley, right? And it's about using your imagination and being a child. So as we do when we have children in the service, if you did not come with a child, then touch into the child that's within you and let me read to you. So once upon a Saturday morning, June woke up early because perhaps today she would search for wild animals, or maybe she would learn how to fly, or maybe she would discover a long-lost treasure. Except there was only one big problem, and that is the list. June had to complete it before she could play. And the more she looked at the list, the longer it appeared. And her list was, pick up the mail, sweep the stairs, clean under your bed. And she goes, when will I get to do what I want? So after breakfast, she goes outside, and as she gazed toward the mailbox, she noticed that there was a crow flying overhead. And the closer she got, the larger it appeared. Excuse me, bird. May I help you, said the bird. Well, please show me the shortest way to the mailbox. Happy to help, the crow flew up in the sky, chose the shortest path, and June did her best to keep up. And she did not stop until it was delivered. Then she comes home, she lingers for a moment, and ran outside for her next chore, which is sweeping the leaves. Leaves covered every step, and a little breeze tossed some of them into the garden. She looks up at the sky, and she says, "Hey, excuse me, please." And the wind said, "Who, me?" Whistled the wind, blowing so loudly that it was difficult to hear her request. Well, eager to help, the wind exhaled a strong gust of wind that sent everything tumbling across the lawn. She shut her eyes and gripped the rail for as long as she could. And she did not open her eyes until she heard, "June, why are you rolling around in the grass?" her mother asked. Oh, well, there's only one last thing to do. So she stood outside her room, she peered in, and she watched for any movement under the bed. She waited, and she listened. And then she said, "Attention, all monsters, here's the exit. It's time to go." You know all the monsters that live under your bed? Then she looked and she realized there's not one single monster, just her missing toys. And so she sorted and stored and picked up every last one, and she was finished, and she opened the door, and she was ready to begin her day. And the story being that she didn't have to wait to begin her day because she used her imagination while she was doing her chores. Do you use your imagination when you're doing your chores? When you go to work in the morning, do you bring your imagination with you? Or is it sometimes where we're so locked into this reality that we forget that we have this incredible gift that is given to us, which is our imagination? I saw an interview they had 50 people were interviewed, adults and children. And the interview consisted of one question. And the question was this: if you could change one thing about your body, what would it be? And we began with the adults. And the adults, one woman says, I have too big a forehead. I wish my forehead wasn't as big as it is. Another guy said, my ears are too big. They've always been too big. If I could change one thing about my body, it would be my ears. Another woman said, I've had trouble with my skin. I would like different skin. Bigger eyes, I'd like to be taller. So they go through the adults, and then they bring the kids in, these little kids from the ages of 4 to about 9 or 10. And they ask them the question, what is the one thing that you would like to change about your body? A little 9-year-old girl says, nothing. And he goes, no, one thing. What is one thing you would like to change about your body? And she said, well, I would like a mermaid tail. And they bring in a little boy. What would you like to change? He goes, I want a shark mouth so that I could eat everything. Little girl said, I would like wings so that I could fly. A little boy said, I want legs like a cheetah so that I can run as fast as a cheetah. Another little girl said, I want extra pointy ears. And someone else said, I want teleportation abilities. And so it was just so sweet to see the kids just imagine, I want a mermaid tail. I want legs like a cheetah. I want a shark mouth so that I can eat everything, instead of, well, I wish my eyes were bigger, whatever. So the truth is that when we bring imagination together with love, Again, there isn't anything that we can't do. A man by the name of Colonel Hall, he was in the Air Force during Vietnam, and he was in a POW camp, and he spent 7 years locked in a dark box in a North Vietnamese prison. So here he is, 7 years, locked in this box. The reality, not so great, right? And yet he used his imagination combined with love because he loved to play golf. So every day in his mind, he played a full round of golf. He played 18 perfect holes in his mind. When he was released, 1 week after getting out, he entered the Greater New Orleans Open, and he shot a 76, which is the best he's ever shot. He hadn't played for 7 years, except in his imagination. He combined his imagination with what he loved in a situation that was horrendous. Yes? Because the truth is, when we combine those two together, it's like we become an attractor and we begin to draw things to us in a synchronistic way. Richard Bach, the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, said that the what-ifs, with Ellen DeGeneres, what if they don't have cheese at the market, he called the what-ifs the dragons. And those are the wild monkey, the dragons that are creating scenarios about everything that could go wrong. When he was a kid, all he wanted to do was fly. And he said he just imagined that he wanted to fly and he wanted to be a pilot, But he said the dragons in his head would say things like, you have to be a super person in order to fly. You have to have eyesight like an eagle. You have to have a mind like a computer. You have to be a great physical specimen, all of which he was none of these things. And so his monkey mind, his what-ifs, continued on. But he never gave up that great love of wanting to fly. So here he is in college. And he said he was taking an archery course, and there was a guy next to him, and he knew the guy's name. And the guy, his name was Bob Creech, I guess, and he was ready to, shoot the arrow. And at that moment, a plane went overhead, and he stopped, and the guy looked at the plane. And without even thinking, Richard Bach said to this guy, just totally off the cuff, totally didn't even know why he said it. He goes, I'll bet you're a flight instructor. And I'll bet that you're looking for someone to come along and wash and polish your airplane, and in return, you're going to teach him how to fly. And the guy was standing there with his bow and arrow, and he looked at him and he goes, how did you know? He needed to have 5 students before he could become a full flight instructor because he was a limited flight instructor. And so he needed another student. And Richard Bach became his second student. Richard Bach said that we are led toward what we love, and all we need to do is to hurl ourselves toward that love. And so in his hurling himself toward his love for flying without knowing how he was going to ever make that happen, a synchronistic event occurred. And he said, that was the only year he was in college at all, was to meet this guy who had an airplane. So when you use your imagination with the power of love, you are an unstoppable force. So what is it that you love? What do you love? And are you allowing your imagination to go there? Meditation is a time for stillness and quiet, so that the what-ifs and the dragons and the wild monkey can be quieted. So it stops it before we say, I don't really need cheese. I'm not going to go to the store because they're not going to have it. Let us emulate our children who are born with their hearts wide open and their minds free to the sky. Their boundaries are fuzzy. They aren't locked in this solid dimension. Why not have cheetah legs? Why not have a mermaid tail? And like June in the story, she made even chores having fun. So as Marilou led us in our candle lighting this morning, my imagination colors my world. Through my imagination, I create a better world. We're led toward what we love, and all we need to do is to hurl ourselves toward that love. So hurl away.